Swear. I think each of us remembers the thunderous voice of the ghost of Hamlet's father. After all, what can be more dramatic than a beloved deceased father compelling his son to take revenge for his most foul and unnatural murder? Good evening, everyone. I'm Vivienne Benesch, producing artistic director, and I am thrilled to welcome you to the 6th episode of Ray Dooley's Think Like an Actor, part of our PlayMakers Keeping You Company series. As many of you have heard me say, after over 30 years and more than 100 productions as one of the great luminaries on stage at PlayMakers, in the classroom at UNC and throughout the Greater Triangle community, Ray Dooley is now unsurprisingly a star on our virtual platforms. And speaking of virtual, I hope you are able to join us for the beginning of our streaming season of virtual theatrical experiences with our encore presentation of Temples of Lung and Air. And if not to worry, there is more where that came from. More of our all too human season. Individual tickets are already on sale now for our staged reading of Sarah Gina Quarty's tender and magical The Storyteller. It's the winner of the International Thomas Wolfe Playwriting Prize, and I'm honored to say that it will be directed by yours truly. For all the details, you can visit playmakersrep.org/human. And none of what we are doing this year would be possible without your support. Many of you have heard me say also that we need to raise $1.5 million this year in order to ensure that we can keep Playmakers playing. If you are able to make a donation this evening to support all the work and artists that make everything at Playmakers possible, thank you. No gift is too small or too big. Now, if you missed any of our previous episodes of Think Like an Actor, you can view them anytime on our YouTube channel. We have placed the link in the chat, or you can always go to our website and find them there. Tonight, Ray turns back to Hamlet to take us through what an actor might and probably should be thinking about in preparing the ghost scenes. Appropriate fare for late October. If you would like to follow along, the text of the scene will also appear in your chat box. And speaking of the chat, while you won't be able to speak directly to me or Ray during the webinar, I do encourage you to find the chat button at the bottom of your screen, write in any questions you might have. You can do this at any point during the class. It won't interrupt. And I will use some of your questions to facilitate a short Q&A when Ray is done. So without further ado, it is my great privilege to pass this off to my dear friend and colleague, the wondrous Ray Dooley.
Thank you, Viv. Thank you.
Of course. Mwah. See you later.
See you later. Welcome, friends. Thanks for joining us tonight. Yes, it is getting near that time in late October, All Hallows Eve. So what better time to look at the ghosts of Shakespeare, the ghost in Hamlet. Shakespeare uses ghosts a number of times as he uses goddesses descending from heaven. It's not just naturalism. Famously in Richard III, on the night before the Battle of Bosworth Field, Richard drifts off to sleep and is visited by the ghosts of the various people that he has murdered. Julius Caesar, before the battle at Philippi, Brutus is visited by the ghost of Julius Caesar, as you will remember from Playmakers production, in the night before the Battle of Philippi. Of course, in the Scottish play, if you will, the ghost of Banquo, who Macbeth has just had murdered, appears to him at a banquet, and only Macbeth can see the ghost of Banquo. But in Hamlet, the ghost is a public figure who appears to others and bodes some strange eruption to our state. And to begin at the beginning, which is the beginning of the play, Act 1, Scene 1, enter two sentinels, Bernardo and Francisco. Bernardo Who's there? Francisco, nay, answer me. Stand and unfold yourself. 2 lines. That's all Shakespeare needs to start us off. Now remember, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon in London. The sun may be shining, but Shakespeare needs to take us to midnight in a cold castle in Denmark. What do we learn from these 2 lines? We see 2 soldiers carrying long pikes, halberds, partisans, as they're called in the play. And they can't see each other. So we know it's dark. And Bernardo, who is actually coming to relieve Francisco, he says, who's there? Which is not his to say. Francisco is the guard on duty. Francisco says, nay, answer me. Stand and unfold yourself. It's too dark, I can't see you. So what we've learned is already these guys are on edge. And Bernardo has jumped the gun in asking, who's there? He's not yet on duty. Things are already a little topsy-turvy. Bernardo says, long live the king. Francisco says, Bernardo? Bernardo says, he. Francisco, you come most carefully upon your hour. I wasn't expecting you yet. Bernardo says, oh, 'tis now struck 12. Get thee to bed, Francisco. Francisco says, for this relief, much thanks. 'Tis bitter cold, and I am sick at heart. Now, we don't know why Francisco is sick at heart, but Shakespeare's already laying in the idea. All is not well. All is not well. It's midnight. These guys are on edge. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Bernardo asks, have you had quiet guard? Francisco says, not a mouse stirring. Maybe the first of many, many famous lines in Hamlet. Not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. Bernardo says, well, good night. If you do meet Horatio and Marcellus, the rivals of my watch, bid them make haste. Now, rivals here, as it does elsewhere in Shakespeare, means partners. So bid them make haste. I'd rather not be out here too long by myself. Francisco, I think I hear them. Horatio and Marcellus come in. Stand ho. Who is there? Horatio says, friends to this ground. And Marcellus, and liegemen to the Dane. All right. So it's worth to think like an actor for just a second. So here we are on the top of these battlements. It's Denmark, it's cold. Guys are on edge. And in comes Marcellus, who is a soldier, probably, we think maybe an officer. Hamlet knows him by name in Act 1, Scene 4. And Horatio, who's a scholar, we find is a friend of, a university friend of Hamlet's. So a couple of questions, we'll find out in a minute. Why is Horatio at midnight, this scholar, it's like a university professor here, on the top of these battlements, standing guard at midnight in the cold? And the second question that we might think, we never think about this if we're in the audience, because with Shakespeare, we accept all this. But if you're thinking like an actor, you think, well, I'm playing Horatio. Well, how do I know these guys? Why am I here? And Marcellus too. Marcellus is the one who went and found Horatio and is bringing him here tonight. What an interesting question. So, you know, in rehearsal, we might talk about this and decide, well, I always thought it was charming to think that maybe they're brothers-in-law. That, you know, 2 nights in a row, this ghost has appeared to Marcellus and Bernardo on the watch. You know, the first night they go by, the ghost goes by, and it's like, oh my God, what was that? And the second night, the ghost goes by, and it's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? He went by again. Now, one of the known things, shall we say, about ghosts, one of the common beliefs at this time, is that a ghost could only be spoken, would only speak when it was spoken to. And you had to be sure to speak to it in the right way, or something bad might happen. So you can just see the two soldiers talking to each other. What are we going to do? I don't know. My brother-in-law's here. He's back from the university. He's a smart guy. Let me bring him, and maybe he'll be able to speak to it. So as actors, we're always looking to create the most solid ground we can for belief in the situation. So Marcellus has gone, and he said to his brother-in-law, Horatio, we've got this situation, and do you think you could maybe come with me tonight for guard duty, and just in case this thing happens again? So here comes Horatio along. Francisco, give you good night. Oh, farewell, honest soldier, says Marcellus. Who hath relieved you? Bernardo has my place. Give you good night. Marcellus turns, hello, Bernardo. Say what? And Bernardo is interested right away. He wants to know. Say what? Is Horatio there? And Horatio says, a piece of him. And this begins the beginning, if you're playing Horatio, wonderful phrases that only Horatio uses in the play that are sort of self-deprecating, sort of diffusing the situation. And in this case, the bit of stage misses that may go with this is that he reaches out his hand, which is the piece of him that he gives. He says a piece of him, and perhaps shakes hands with Bernardo. And of course, he's coming out of the shadows, which may be another way when we don't have our wonderful modern stage with the great lighting effects that we can do. It's 2:00 in the afternoon in London. So we create that with the language and with the acting. And Bernardo says, welcome, Horatio. Welcome, good Marcellus. And Horatio says, what? Has this thing appeared again tonight? So what we know is there's a thing out there. These guys are on edge, and there's a thing. Now, those of you of a certain age may remember a monster movie called The Thing. James Arness, I believe. It took place in a scientific station in Antarctica, if memory serves. But this idea of this thing, Shakespeare planting these seeds, it's unknown, it's this thing. Bernardo says, oh, I've seen nothing. Marcellus, they've been talking on their way, and he says, Horatio says, 'tis but our fantasy, our imagination, he's saying, and will not let belief take hold of him, touching this dreaded sight, twice seen of us. So Marcellus is laying this into Horatio, which, by the way, then lays it into the audience. And if you're playing Marcellus, you're thinking like an actor, what do I need to get out there to the audience? I'm activating my exposition, as we call it as actors. We've got this exposition, we've got to get this information out to set the scene for the audience. So I'm activating it, and my best way to do that is to activate it toward another actor. So he says to Horatio, twice seen of us. Therefore, I have entreated him along with us to watch the minutes of this night, that if again this apparition come, so all they know, it's an it, it's a thing, it's an apparition. He may approve our eyes, may tell us we're not crazy, that he'll see it too, and speak to it, because he's a scholar, he's a learned man. He will know how to speak to the ghost. Bernardo says, Horatio says, oh, tush, tush, 'twill not appear. Bernardo says, oh no, sit down a while and let us once again assail your ears that are so fortified against our story, what we 2 nights have seen. And Horatio says, well, all right, let's sit down and hear Bernardo speak of this. So Bernardo starts in, and he's trying to make this very clear to Horatio, which, by the way, then makes it clear to the audience. He says, last night of all, last night, when yon same star that's westward from the pole, so they're outdoors, yeah, hath made his course to illumine that part of heaven where now it burns. In other words, this time, last night, Marcellus and myself, the bell then beating 1, and sure enough, enter ghost. So where are we on the stage? Well, if we're on Shakespeare's stage, we're probably, two things might be happening. Either they're upstage and there's a trap door in Shakespeare's stage that's downstage center, and either that trap has come down and the ghost is rising from there, or more likely in this case, it's entering from one of the doors on either side of the stage, and it comes in. Marcellus says, who's the one not involved in this other conversation, he's been keeping watch, and he says, peace, break me off, break thee off, look where it comes again. And Bernardo says, in the same figure as the king that's dead. Now let's notice here, he doesn't say it's the king's ghost. It's an apparition, it's a thing. They don't know whether it's a good ghost, a bad ghost, it's an apparition. It's walking around looking like the king. And Marcellus says, thou art a scholar, Horatio, speak to it. Like, you're the smart guy here, you're supposed to know how to do this. And Bernardo, who again, turning to Horatio and saying, looks he not like the king? Mark it, Horatio. And Horatio staring, he's made a believer now. And he says, most like, it harrows me with fear and wonder. Harrows is a verb that will run again, across again in Act 1, Scene 5, when Ghost is speaking. But it's the harrow, like a farm implement, that's raking across Horatio's soul here, and his imagination and his mind. It harrows me with fear and wonder. These guys are really, really scared by this. This is outside anything that they have any understanding for. As we will see again in the famous line, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy, that Hamlet says in Act 1, Scene 4, Act 1, Scene 5. So the ghost stops. Bernardo says, it would be spoke to. And Marcellus, again, they're egging Horatio on, right? Question it, Horatio. Horatio steps forward. And he says, what art thou that usurpst this time of night? That is a place where you should not be. At this, you've taken this whole night together, and also usurped that fair and warlike form in which the majesty of buried Denmark did sometimes march. So he's saying, why have you also usurped? Why have you also illegally, if you will, taken on that form, you spirit about whom I know not, whether you are good or bad? And the ghost then, recognizing that the person that he's looking for is not there, the ghost turns and walks away. By heaven, I charge thee, speak. Marcellus, it is offended. Bernardo, see, it stalks away. And Horatio, a step or two after it stays, speak, I charge thee, speak. Marcellus, and the ghost probably goes through the other door on the other side of the stage as the guys adjust, counter around. Marcellus, 'tis gone and will not answer. And Bernardo turns now to Horatio, and he gets a little back, and he goes, how now, Horatio, you who would not believe us, you tremble and look pale. Is not this something more than fantasy? What think you on't? And Horatio says, before my God, I might not this believe without the sensible and true avouch of mine own eyes. So immediately he goes into the language of God. It's like, I'm not reason. No, something bigger going on here. And Marcellus said, is it not like the king? And Horatio says, as thou art to thyself. Such was the very armor he had on when he, the ambitious Norway, combated. So frowned he once, when in an angry parle he smote the sledded poleaxe on the ice. 'Tis strange. Now let's put our actor hat on again here. Now, how does Horatio know what the old Hamlet looked like when he, and here's a word that has switched pronunciations over the centuries, it's combated here. When he, the ambitious Norway, combated, remember we're in iambic pentameter. And how does he know that this is the way he frowned? When he, in an angry parle, and here parle can mean both a discussion having to do with words and a discussion having to do with swords. He smote the sledded poleaxe on the ice. Much ink has been spilled over the sledded poleaxe, but it probably means that the guys from Poland were coming across the ice on sleds. That's probably what it means. And so if you're in a modern production, you know, and you're thinking like an actor, you can think, well, okay, so I saw the newsreel, or I saw the press photos of what he looked like then. But if you're not in there and you're trying to make sense, this is like our famous line from Juliet, the orchard walls are high and hard to climb. And you say, well, how does she know? Has she tried to climb them? So here, how does Horatio know what Hamlet looked like both those times? And is it perhaps that Horatio used to be a soldier himself? Is that how he and Marcellus got to know each other, and then one of them married the other's sister? And is that why he's okay coming here at this point? Does he know something about being a soldier? All those kinds of things are lots of fun to talk about in rehearsal. But if you're playing Horatio, you need to know, is there a famous painting that he saw at Wittenberg University where it's this case? But what we do know here, and it'll come up again in Act 1, Scene 4, that the ghost of Hamlet has what is called the beaver, or the visor of the helmet up, and he can see the ghost's face, and that's how close they were. So Horatio is shaking in his boots, and he's saying, my God, that's just the way the old king looked. So Marcellus coming in, and here's the third time. You know, Arthur Miller used to say about playwriting, tell the audience what you're going to say it, and tell the audience what you said. So here, 400 years earlier, Marcellus, thus twice before, and jump at this dead hour, at this same time, at this dead hour, the dead waste and middle of the night, as Horatio calls it in a later scene. So again, reminding the audience that we're in the middle of the night. It's dark, there's nothing around, and the ghost is coming out to these poor guys out here on the balcony. And he says, with martial stalk, in other words, dressed in a military way and walking in a military manner, he has gone by our watch. So Horatio says a very interesting line. He says, in what particular thought to work, I know not. But in the gross and scope of my opinion, this bodes some strange eruption to our state. So the particular thought is not what the ghost is thinking. He's saying, I don't know, I don't have a specific answer, and I'm not sure where to look for a specific answer, but my gut feeling is the gross and scope of my opinion. My general feeling is that this means something is wrong here in Denmark. Something is rotten here in Denmark, as will be said later on in the next scene on the battlements. So already Shakespeare is laying in, the ghost is appearing, and Horatio is putting two and two together. There's something wrong in the state. And we've seen this in other places, in, of course, in Julius Caesar, as Horatio is about to say. The natural world in this understanding of the universe that Shakespeare is writing about, whether he held it himself, we don't know, but certainly this world he's writing about, what each individual does is reflected in nature, is reflected in the stars. The night that Duncan is killed in the Scottish play, when Ross and Lennox arrive, the next morning they talk about all the strange things that happened to them. Chimneys were blown down, all kinds of strange things happen because of the murder of that king. And we see this again and again in Shakespeare, how even in Midsummer Night's Dream, when Oberon and Titania are having that battle. And so the whole world is messed up, and we've got summer and winter and winter and summer. And this is another example of that. There's something going on in the state that is calling forth this ghost. So Marcellus, I'm going to skip through some of these larger, give you a synopsis of these. Marcellus then, in the next 12 lines or so, he says, hey, listen, somebody tell me. And what Horatio has just said it connects this in his mind. He says, this bodes some strange eruption in our state. And Marcellus says, yeah, speaking of that, I've noticed that, we're on guard all night. What's that about? And I've noticed that the armorers and the shipwrights and they're it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's something going on, and we're arming as if we're going to war. And Horatio says, yeah, I can tell you about that. He says, at least the whisper goes so. And he explains that there was a battle, one-on-one battle between Fortinbras, the king of Norway, and the king and old Hamlet. And they each had put up a great deal of land to be given to the winner of the battle. And as it turns out, Hamlet slew Fortinbras, rough world, and so got all of that land. And then he goes on, because now we meet a character who we're going to meet again in it's Act 5, of course, but we're going to hear about him. And it's old Fortinbras, the Norwegian king. It's his son. And he says, now, sir, this is Horatio speaking, explaining all of this, activating his exposition so they understand, so the audience understands. Now, sir, young Fortinbras, the son, of unimproved mettle, hot and full. So he's a young man who is still headstrong. He's still all full about adrenaline and the fire of youth. Hath in the skirts of Norway, that is to say, in the outlying regions of Norway, here and there, sharked up a list of lawless resolutes. So like a shark grabs food, say you and you and you and you. And these are lawless guys. These are young toughs, if you will. And for food and diet to some enterprise that hath a stomach in it. No, and he's not paying them in food. No, what it means is the enterprise that he is gathering them for is going to devour them like food. And we recall in Henry IV, Part 2, when Hal says to Falstaff about the men that Falstaff has gathered to be his company, says, yeah, they look pretty bad. And Falstaff says, food for powder, food for powder. They'll fill a pit as well as another man. So that's this crew that Fortinbras has gathered. And they're headed this way, essentially, he says, to get back the land that the father lost. And this, I take it, is the main motive of our preparations. The source of this, our watch, and the chief head of this post-haste and rummage in the land. This coming attack that we know about is what's going on here. Then Bernardo says, yeah, I think it be no other, but e'en so. Well may it sort that this portentous figure comes armed through our watch, so like the king that was and is the question of these wars. So Bernardo's putting it together, saying, oh, that's why the king looks like this. Now, of course, that's not at all the reason, as we'll find out later, but he's trying to piece it together. And then a wonderful line from Horatio, a mote it is to trouble the mind's eye. We know by the mind's eye, he means the imagination, the thought process. And by a mote it is, quoting the Bible there, the mote, look for the log in your own eye, not the mote in your neighbor's eye. But what he means by that is the mind, if the mind were an eye, it would be like a little piece of dust. And so you can't stop blinking, right? If you've got that piece of dust. So his mind can't stop thinking about it. A mote it is to trouble the mind's eye. And that reminds him, then he talks about what was going on in Rome just before Julius Caesar was murdered. And then he says, and even the like precurse of feared events, eclipses, all those crazy things, as harbingers preceding still the fates and prologue to the omen coming on, have heaven and earth together demonstrated unto our climatures and countrymen. So the same thing that was going on in Rome, the same kind of thing before the mightiest Caesar fell, is going on here. So again, laying in, something is rotten, something is rotten. And right at that moment, of course, we've been chatting now for 3 or 4 minutes, so maybe we've sort of forgotten why we're here. And then all of a sudden, here comes the ghost, either back in at the door or maybe up from the trap. And Horatio this time is the one who sees it and says, but soft, behold, lo, where it comes again. And he takes a step toward it. And in the text that I'm using, I'll talk a little bit about that text in a second, the ghost spreads its arms as if warning Horatio to come no closer. Horatio says, I'll cross it, though it blast me. I'll get in its way. I'll cross its path. So he does. And he says, stay, illusion. And the ghost is there listening with its arms crossed. If thou hast any sound or use of voice, speak to me. If there be any good thing to be done that may to thee do ease and grace to me, speak to me. If thou art privy to thy country's fate, which haply foreknowing may avoid, oh, speak. Or if thou hast uphoarded in thy life extorted treasure in the womb of earth, for which they say your spirits oft walk in death, speak of it, stay and speak. And just at that moment, the rooster crows, the cock crows. So Horatio here has tried 4 different approaches to get the ghost to speak. And the first thing he says, if thou hast any sound or use of voice, speak to me. I've heard that ghosts won't speak until somebody speaks to them. So he tries that first. Nothing happens. If the ghost is in torment and needs something done, so he tries his second try. If there be any good thing to be done, that may to thee do ease and grace to me, speak to me. Nothing. So now, thinking back to the Julius Caesar thing that he's just talked about, and all the other rummage in the land, rummage, moving, it's a word that means moving things around on a ship, a lot of busy work. If thou art privy to thy country's fate, which happily foreknowing may avoid, in other words, if you can tell me something that's going to keep us from having a terrible calamity, please let me know. Oh, speak. And there's an emptiness in the line. And then he tries a final thing, which is Horatio has heard that sometimes ghosts will remain near the earth if there is, if they have buried treasure or if they've hidden money, a great deal of money around. And speaking of ghosts talking about money, we get a quick jump forward, perhaps to someone named Jacob Marley, telling Mr. Scrooge about the dangers of hoarding up money. But here, Horatio is trying to figure out why this ghost is here. And again, and he said, or if thou hast uphoarded in thy life extorted treasure in the womb of earth, for which they say, your or you, depending on the text you're using, spirits oft walk in death, can't leave because they're tied to that feeling about the money. Speak of it, stay and speak. So he's still not convinced it's the king there. He doesn't know why the ghost is here. And then the cock crows, and the ghost hears that and takes off. And Horatio cries out, stop it, Marcellus. And Marcellus says, shall I strike at it with my partisan? And he takes his pike and he takes a swing at it. And Horatio says, do, and it will not stand. Bernardo, 'tis here, Horatio, 'tis here. Marcellus, 'tis gone. And then we do it wrong, being so majestical, to offer it the show of violence. For it is as the air, invulnerable, and our vain blows, malicious mockery. Yeah, it's the mockery of malice, because we couldn't hurt it if we hit it with any of our weapons, because it's just air. We think settles. Bernardo lays in a key factor, and he says, it was about to speak when the cock crew. And Horatio says, and then it started like a guilty thing upon a fearful summons. And he goes on, I have heard the cock, that is the trumpet of the morn, doth with his lofty and shrill sounding throat awake the god of day. And at his warning, whether in sea or fire, in earth or air, the extravagant, in other words, out, away from its natural abode, and erring spirit hies to his confine. And of the truth herein, this present object made probation. This ghost behaved the same way as I have always heard that ghosts behave. So we're seeing that again. And Marcellus agreeing, and again, laying in for the third time, yeah, it faded on the crowing of the cock, just like you said. Of course, we're going to see that happen at the end of Act 1, Scene 5, when Hamlet's father, the ghost of Hamlet's father, is speaking to Hamlet. So again, take a moment. Shakespeare is, in a sense, reviewing and using common ideas that were in among the people about how ghosts behave. And we talked a little bit when we were talking about Shakespeare's comedy about one of the things perhaps that makes it so long lasting is that he incorporates not only the wit, not only our intellectual life, but he incorporates our spiritual life, our superstitions. And in creating this ghost in this first scene of the play, he's laying in all of these factors that go to convince us of the dramatic reality of the ghost as it is convincing the three men on stage. And another nice thing pointed out by pointed out by our editor here in this text is that when the ghost, the second time there, when the ghost spreads its arms, that's more than it did the first time. So the first time it walked by, the second time it stopped and spread its arms and listened, but didn't hear what it needed to hear and realized again, or was maybe about to say something, maybe, but then the cock crew. So again, it's a teaser, right? It's a teaser, a little more. And then the rooster crows and off goes the ghost. So he's building the suspense. And then Marcellus, in a very interesting small speech, he says, it faded on the crowing of the cock. And he says, someday, some say, that ever 'gainst that season comes, wherein our Saviour's birth is celebrated. This bird of dawning singeth all night long. And then, they say, no spirit dare stir abroad. The nights are wholesome. Then no planets strike. There are no comets, no harbingers of ill in the sky. No fairy takes. Again, these are people who believed, the country people certainly, simpler people believed in fairies. So no fairies could come in, nor witch hath power to charm. So hallowed and so gracious is that time. And of course, he's talking about Christmas time. And it's interesting thinking about this. It's the only time that I'm aware of in all of Shakespeare where Christ, is our Savior, as Marcellus says, is actually alluded to. In many cases, we have clergymen, right? We have Friar Lawrence and the Friar in Much Ado About Nothing, and Cardinal Wolsey and Henry VIII, and various bishops in the history plays, Westminster in Richard II. But this is the only direct reference to that kind of Christian belief that I'm aware of. And it may be, and Stephen Greenblatt in Will and the World makes a good case for this, it may be that to talk religion back in this time with what was dangerous, let's say that, because there were the Catholic, Henry VIII left the Catholic Church, then his daughter Mary Tudor comes in, turns everybody back Catholic, and Elizabeth comes in, turns everybody back to the Church of England. And they were constant back and forth, and you could be killed for your religious beliefs. So it may be much longer conversation, but Stephen Greenblatt lays this out quite well in Will and the World, that it just was so dangerous that Shakespeare just may have stood clear of it and never took or just left that away. So this is a very interesting moment. And again, that appeal to God, to something, Horatio says, by God, I would not have believed this. So he's getting at some kind of thing that's beyond reason. They're trying to figure something out. And here's Horatio. Again, he's been to university, so he doesn't quite buy into this all the way. This is another wonderful self-deprecating line of, or character line, if you will, of Horatio. Marcellus lays all that out about how at Christmas time, roosters, they say, sing all night long, and then none of this bad stuff can happen because it's a hallowed and blessed time. And Horatio says, so have I heard, and do in part believe it. So there's a part of Horatio that wants to believe this, and a part of him that is going to stand a little aloof of this, of that kind of belief, because he's been to university. So Horatio is an interesting character that bridges two worlds, which may be, as Hamlet later says of him, maybe what makes him such a good friend to Hamlet. Anyway, he looks up and he says, but look, the morn in russet mantle clad walks o'er the dew of yon high eastward hill. So a very beautiful way of saying that the dawn is coming. The morn so he pictures the goddess of dawn, Aurora, walking in a red cloak across the top of the hills. The morn in russet mantle clad walks o'er the dew of yon high eastward hill. So the other thing we want to notice there is that, okay, we're pretty far north, right? It's cold, so it's going to be at least October. We don't think it's Christmas because they're talking about Christmas. So maybe it's October or November. So dawn would come when? And at the beginning of the scene, it was midnight, right? So this is a kind of typical Shakespearean time compression. Now, if you're watching the play, you never even notice it. And the idea is they've been there all night, and the time has passed that quickly. So time in Shakespeare is very elastic, but in playing it and in watching the play, you never notice it because it all is included in the dramatic action in a wonderful way. Horatio has an idea. Break we are, watch up. We're done here. And by my advice, let us impart what we have seen tonight unto young Hamlet. For upon my life, this spirit, dumb to us, will speak to him. Do you consent that we shall acquaint him with it as needful in our loves, fitting our duty? Let's do it, I pray. And this morning, I this morning know where we shall find him most conveniently. Says Marcellus, the soldier who knows what's on the agenda for the day within the castle. And we'll notice that Horatio said there that it's both our duty and out of friendship to go tell Hamlet. So here, that's Act 1, Scene 1. The ghost has come in twice. We've learned that it's willing to stop and listen, but hasn't yet spoken, but it's become a little more active the second time. We've learned that these three, two soldiers and a scholar who seem to be reliable, are saying, yeah, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Something is wrong here. And Shakespeare has put this in. So we next meet our friends here in Act 1, Scene 4. But first, there's the scene where they tell Hamlet, this is the end of Act 1, Scene 2, after, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. Hamlet left alone on stage saying, Mom married my uncle, not good. And our three friends come in, and this is where we learn that Hamlet knows Marcellus. So, did he stop by Bernardo's one day and did he stop by Horatio's one day? And Marcellus was there, and that's how he knows Marcellus. That's interesting because he doesn't know Bernardo. He turns to Bernardo and says, good evening, sir. So he's polite, warming, welcoming to Bernardo. And then Horatio and the two gentlemen tell what they have seen. And they go through it. And Hamlet asks them, well, how did he look? Sorrow, in anger? And Horatio says, a countenance more in sorrow than in anger. And he said, he was armed from top to foot. And Horatio says, yes, from top to cap a pay. And Horatio, Hamlet tests him. He says, then saw you not his face? And Hamlet says, oh, yes, my lord, he wore his beaver up. That's when he said, how looked he? Pale? Pale. And once Hamlet's convinced that this was a figure strange enough and enough like his father, he says to Horatio, I will watch tonight. Perchance 'twill walk again. And Horatio says, I warrant it will. And Hamlet says, if it assume my noble father's person, if it assume, it doesn't say my father, he doesn't know yet. If this spirit, remember later on, he says, the spirit that we have seen, I have seen may be the devil. And the devil has power to assume a pleasing shape, yea. And out of my weakness and my melancholy, as he is very potent with such spirits, abuses me to damn me. That's when he has the idea to do the play within the play. But at this point, he says, if it assume my noble father's shape, my noble father's person, I'll speak to it, though hell itself should gape and bid me hold my peace. I prithee, if thou hast hitherto concealed this sight, and he asks them, and maybe they nod. And he says, let it be tenable in your silence still. Give it an understanding, but no tongue. I will requite your loves. So he asks them to be quiet, to be secretive about it. Upon the platform, twixt 11 and 12, I'll visit you. And they say, our duty to your honor. And Hamlet corrects them. He says, no, your loves as mine to you. So this goes something to Hamlet's character, that they're being very formal. And he says, no, guys, my loves as mine to you. The warmth of the character, which we see later on in the play. So they leave. And Hamlet turns to the audience and says, my father's spirit in arms. All is not well. Would the night were come. Till then, sit still, my soul. Foul deeds will rise, though all the earth o'erwhelm them to men's eyes. And we're out. And maybe that's a good place to stop for now. I do want to say that the edition that I'm using is the Ardent Shakespeare, the second edition, edited by Harold Jenkins, who spent 30 years of his life putting this together. And for anybody interested in a really, really expert deep dive into Hamlet, I recommend this, the second edition. There is a third edition out, but the second edition is really the way to go. So perhaps next time we'll pick up with Hamlet joining Horatio and Marcellus on the battlements. "'Tis bitter cold, and I am sick at heart," said Francisco. And the first lines of that next scene is, "'Tis the air bites shrewdly. It is very cold." Yeah. So thank you all. Hello, Viv.
Hello. So please, everyone, please write questions into the chat. I see one coming in already, but Ray, I just want to ask a little bit about the construction of a great ghost story. There's something about just sort of listening to you explain this step by step in that first that makes it like such a great, it's truly a fantastic setup. And I don't think I've ever heard that in it before. I've always thought, oh, it sets the scene, it sets the note, but no, he's actually constructed cliffhangers all the way through it.
That's right. That's right. And you know, I interrupt just for a second. You know, John Gielgud has had a very funny thing to say about this scene. John Gielgud, of course, the great British actor and director, and he said that normally these roles, particularly Francisco, Bernardo, and Marcellus, are assigned to the least experienced actors in the company because they're the small roles. And he said that's a terrible mistake because you've got to have really good actors laying in all of these layers so that we start this play off really well, really understanding how terrified these three, well, of the four of them, including Francisco, who leaves early on, but how truly terrified and beyond their reason they are. So yes, sorry, go ahead.
No, not at all. I'm going to ask Iwa's question, which do we know about what people of Shakespeare believed about ghosts and spirits?
I'm sorry, say again.
What did people of Shakespeare's time believe about ghosts
and spirits? Yeah, well, we're seeing some of that in those four things that Marcellus, Horatio asks the ghost. He's going on what he knows, that either the ghost has been tied close to, because even at that point, he's not sure. It looks like the king, but he's not sure that it is the king. It's taken on the king's shape. So either the ghost has been tied close to the earth because it's buried up a lot of money somewhere and can't leave it because it loves that money, which goes back to our Jacob Marley likeness, or it has a warning to give. And he says, you know, if there's something that, you know, that happily foreknowing our state may avoid it, or that it is certainly that it won't speak unless it's spoken to. And we see this even in the I think in the Dracula myth, that kind of thing where it will only come in if it is invited in. And so you have to be real careful how you do that, which is probably why they're asking Horatio to come, because he's been to the university and they figure he'll know how to do this. And he tries, and he does bring out those things that people know about ghosts. And again, in Midsummer Night's Dream, when you're dealing with Puck, all of those household things, those mischief that he works in the house, and all of those things we learn about there. But Shakespeare is actually using what is known about ghosts at that time to build in what Horatio tries, Horatio tries to get the ghost to speak. And again, also we know that with the cock crowing, as soon as the dawn starts to come, and this is also spoke of, you may remember in Midsummer Night's Dream, Fairy Puck's talking, Fairy King attend and mark, I do hear the morning lark. It's meaning, hey, we got to go. And Oberon, of course, say, but we are creatures of another sort. I, with the morning's love, have oft made sport. And on he goes. So Oberon drawing a distinction between his kind of spirit and the kind of spirit that does troop home to churchyards when dawn comes. So those are some of the things that Shakespeare is building in about spirits at that time.
We're having some slight technical issues from Vivienne's end.
Oh, that's all good.
I think she is joining now. Ray, while we're waiting, what is the author and name of the book that you just mentioned?
Let's see. If it's this, the text of Hamlet that I'm using, it's the Arden Shakespeare Hamlet, the second edition, and it's Harold Jenkins, the late Professor Harold Jenkins, did a wonderful job with this. It took 30 years for him to put all of it together. And he's got longer notes about all of these things we were talking about the spirits, and you can learn all about that in there. He's done all that legwork for it in that book. And the other book on Hamlet that I would strongly recommend, it's out of print, but still you can find it in libraries, very expensive editions, used editions on Amazon, is The Heart of Hamlet by Bernard Grebonier, Grebanier. Has a very interesting take on Hamlet, which was the take that when I think about the play, that I think it's right. And when I played Hamlet, that was the approach that I used to it. It's a really smart reading of the play as well.
Ray, forgive my bad internet connection, but we're running out of time. I wanted to just touch, in terms of thinking like an actor, about this idea of elastic time. And what you were talking about. And for the actor, so many of us spend time trying to justify, trying to knit one thing to another and make sense of it all. But as you said, there's so much that doesn't add up in Shakespeare. So what is your advice to the actor on how to handle that? Yeah, you and I spoke about this on another occasion, but you make as much sense as you can. For example, it would be helpful to know how Marcellus and Horatio know each other. And so that's an easy get. You figure that out in rehearsal. So it's just so you have that much more belief in what you're doing. Then there are some things you just have to let go. How Horatio knows what old Hamlet looked like, because you then run into the problem, of course, that the gravedigger tells us that Hamlet, young Hamlet, was born on the day that old Hamlet killed Norway. Right. And so that then, like, you know, so there are some things in Shakespeare that you simply have to let go, and you just, oh, it's dawn. And you immediately, it's like in your brain, you just do a jump cut. And you don't, and it's like, now it's dawn. Of course it is. And I'm going to say some beautiful words about the dawn coming, and let's go find Hamlet. And so you build in as much belief. Really, it's belief. You build in, you know, when you say make believe, well, you make belief. And you make belief as an actor so that you can look at people and believe you're looking at them and talking to them, and you can believe mostly in the situation and what you're seeing in front of you. And then the rest, you have confidence that no one watching the play is going to say, well, you know, it was only 10. No, it just, because we then enter into the world of the play and it sweeps us along and we never worry about it. Wow. Well, that's sort of a beautiful idea to finish on for the evening, to say that, like, in order for an audience to make believe, that you as an actor help us make belief.
Yes.
You make belief so that we can do that. And I think that's just beautifully put. There, I hope we have more ghost scene to look forward to next month, when we will be in a different time. I was going to say, I opened this evening with the ghost's words, swear. And I suppose if I were the ghost right now, I might go, vote. Vote. There. So everyone go out and vote, and there. But I want to thank you, Ray, once again, and thank our audience who has become, I know many of you have been here all 6 times. And if you're here for the first time, we hope you've enjoyed it and come back. And again, thank you for supporting us in all different ways. For many of you who have been part of this, you have been able to make donations. And I want to say on behalf of all of us at PlayMakers, thank you. And we hope to keep seeing you with everything that we are doing. And The Storyteller, a beautiful story of belief and make-believe, coming to you in the next couple of weeks. So keep your eye out for emails about that, and much, much more. And happy Halloween, and may the ghosts be generous and good in the weeks ahead. I guess, we got in trouble last time, Ray, when we didn't do our sign off. So I'd like to say goodnight by saying, I'm Vivienne Benesch, and I'm a playmaker.
And I'm Ray Dooley, and I'm a playmaker.
Good night, everyone.